What you're looking at is the wreckage of the World Central Kitchen convoy that was carrying 7 aid workers when it was hit by Israeli Defense Force missiles in Gaza last week. Well, rage flew. Israel called it a mistake, investigated, some senior leaders have been suspended, and a number of aid agencies, including World Central Kitchen, stopped providing aid in Gaza. Boats with food turned back, but Gazans still need to eat every day. So how will they do that? What does that attack change? It's a pretty good question for Margaret Evans, our senior international correspondent in London. So, Margaret, you and I were based in the Middle East for a time together. We've been in and out of Gaza a lot. Can we talk for a moment about hunger? Because I know you've covered it all over the world, but it's been different from this, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Adrienne, back in 2004, Darfur, South Sudan, sort of around 2017, most recently Somalia. But in all of those instances, the build-up to the sense of crisis has been over a much longer period of time than what we're actually seeing or have seen in Gaza.
So it's interesting when we talk about food and famine and hunger, because sometimes people use hunger and starvation as terms interchangeably, but there is something called this international food security phase classification. I mean, as horrible as it sounds, it seems to rank hunger needs on this multi-point scale from minimal to famine. So bear with me here, because I want to show you a map of how they divided Gaza in terms of famine. So if we have a look over here, this is the north, where famine is projected to be imminent, with cases of malnutrition at really high levels, especially in young children. The southern regions over here are in what's called an emergency phase. So that means there's high levels of food insecurity, and a few key spots where the red X is there is where there is a risk of famine. So, Margaret, Israel has said that, hundreds of trucks are being allowed into Gaza carrying aid, but we know that the needs, as you've just seen, are different across the strip. So how much of a difference will those trucks make?
Of course, you have to remember, as you were pointing out, the difference between the north and the south of Gaza. In the north, you have had Palestinians cut off for most of the war from the rest of the strip. And if you look at the way that the aid is entering by land, in any case, all of it's coming from southern Gaza. So getting those convoys up to the north has been really, really difficult. Israel has also banned the main UN organization that delivers food to Gaza from delivering or taking trucks to the north. It accuses the organization, which is called UNRWA, of actually sympathizing with Hamas. So the situation is much more dire for people up in the north, and that's why the famine kind of warnings are taking place up there. In terms of the numbers of trucks getting in, on Sunday we heard that about 320 trucks got in. That is definitely an increase, but it's certainly nowhere near the 500 trucks that need to get in every day, according to aid agencies, to sort of reverse this sort of pending famine, they say. They also say that the key to doing that is sustainability.
So while we're talking about this critical geography, I want to bring up another map here. So let's scroll forward a little bit. Let's look at this right here. So after the airstrikes last week on World Central Kitchen, Israel promised to open up more aid corridors. Got the Erez crossing, this is in the north, Keren Shalom in the south, and then there's the Rafah crossing with Egypt. Margaret, when you look at these corridors, when you look at these crossings, what story did they tell you?
Well, the Erez crossing, I think, Adrienne, is the one that's most important. You know it well. Before the war, it was the main entry point from Israel into northern Gaza. It's where journalists would cross. It would be where Palestinians, if they had permission to leave for medical aid or for a job, would go into Israel. Very important because it's, of course, in the north, and it's only about 40 kilometers from the port of Ashdod. So potentially a lot of aid could come in that way. Israel has said it has been inoperable up to this point because it came under attack by Hamas militants on October 7th, but it says now it's going to reopen it. And it does have the potential to be a game changer in the north. But, even if Israel does go ahead with these new corridors that it's talking about, you have to remember that it doesn't address the security issues that aid agencies have raised with Israel in the wake of the World Central Kitchen deaths. They say what they need is better coordination and guarantees from Israel in terms of protecting aid workers on the ground. There have been about 200 Palestinian aid workers killed since the start of the war, and some of those aid organizations on the ground actually believe that they're being targeted. So, you know, that's one of the main issues they say that they have to address on a systemic level.
So we know that a lot of the pressure to allow for more aid into Gaza has been coming from the United States, which makes this a pretty good moment to bring in CBC correspondent Paul Hunter in Washington. Paul, thanks for being with us. We can imagine the trucks we've seen heading into Gaza are part of the answer to that pressure from President Joe Biden. The U.S. wants more right now, is that right?
100%, Adrienne. The U.S. very much wants tactile, real-world, measurable steps taken by Israel to end the suffering in Gaza, and it wants them quickly. Think back to that phone call last week between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. You may recall, Adrienne, that was a late night for you and me here in the National because there were developments from Israel throughout the evening. Amazing when you think about it, how quickly after that 30-minute phone call that Israel announced that it would indeed be allowing aid in through Erez and beyond. But that's because in that phone call, Biden is said to have demanded speed, demanded that Israel announce those steps that night, and it did. The aid is desperately needed in Gaza, but this issue is massively important for the political future of Joe Biden. Yes, he's had a long history of engagement with the situation in the Middle East, long relationship with Netanyahu going back decades. His support for Israel is solid. But this is an election year in the U.S., and Biden has taken a ton of heat for not pushing back hard enough against Israel. It's interesting, over the course of time, we've been reporting on this story. You know, early days, it was, X number of Palestinians dead, then 5,000, 10, 12, 18,000, 25, now 33,000, right? Then all of a sudden, 7 aid workers get killed, and Biden makes that phone call. In Canada, we talk about Jacob Flickinger as the Canadian killed, but of course he was a dual citizen. And here, the headline is an American killed, not lost on Joe Biden. On top of that, the significance of the pressure from Arab and Muslim Americans on Biden can't be overstated. Bottom line, Biden wants Israel to take those steps and to do so quickly because Palestinians in Gaza desperately need them, but as well to show Americans he's doing something on it and he's taking this on in a way that actually makes a difference.
Right, and bottom line for Gazans is they need to eat tonight, right? So even if Israel were to open up those aid corridors we just talked about, including in the north, who polices those convoys? Who distributes that aid?
Yeah, and Margaret was getting at this in a way. Look, it's not really clear is the answer, at least not in any meaningful way. And that's another major problem. It's one thing to get food on trucks crossing into Gaza, but how do you get enough of it into the mouths of 2 million Palestinians who are starving? Desperation in Gaza is fierce. Remember that drone video of the aid drop onto the beach a few weeks ago and Palestinians kind of screaming out in all directions trying to get at it? Well, it's because they're all starving and they'll do whatever it takes to get food. There are myriad stories of aid trucks, once they get in, being looted. For example, sometimes strictly by people desperate for anything, other times by those who steal it and put it on the black market. Keep in mind, there's no real police force in Gaza right now. Itself is a victim of the 6 months of bombardment. So the place is effectively lawless. Hamas, of course, has overarching control. It has made clear any Palestinians seen to be helping Israel get aid in will be considered to be collaborators. And into all of that, again, comes the attack on that food aid convoy with the underlying message, as Margaret was noting, that even if you get past the looting, even if you can deal with the lawlessness, no one is safe anywhere, hence aid organizations contemplating next steps.
Yeah, and desperate times call for desperate measures. You talk about that food aid drop. When we saw it happening from Jordan, not only did parachutes not open, even though they were trying to drop in a grid pattern, who knows where some of the aid dropped. Margaret, you and I have been talking about some of it has gone way off course.
That's right. I think one of the things that looking at this conflict, which is strange, if you look at it, I'm thinking of a being in South Sudan on the ground with people waiting for the airdrop, the vast territory, the coordination that was taking place with the people on the ground, a huge X marking where the drop was going to take place. Also in other areas or places where famine or hunger has been on the approach, you see people moving vast distances to escape war or drought. And of course, in this instance, you have this small sliver of land, Gaza, about an hour's drive away from Tel Aviv, where people are, eating dinner, and it's all, on people's television screens, and still people are starving, and nobody seems able to break through it, and it, to me, it reminds me that this is a problem that is not actually going to resolve itself unless you return to diplomacy, and it has to be much stronger diplomacy than we've seen up to this point.
All right, Paul Hunter, Margaret Evans, thank you so much for being with us.